Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you're watching on. If you're watching live, they'll show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And I hope you're having a lovely Tuesday today. And my title for today is War and Peace. And um, this is kind of continuing yesterday's conversation about conflict. And if you remember, yesterday we were talking about why it's important not to be in a state of constant conflict and to avoid conflict when possible, um, and use your energies where they're going to be most productive. And if you must be in a conflict, make sure that it is worthy of your time and effort, um, and not just a wasting of your resources and the resources of any group you may be involved in. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. And hello to Black Crystal in the chat room. It's good to see you, Black Crystal. Um, Now, this is not to say that you're not going to encounter conflict. They'll be constant. It's the nature of life to involve conflict. It's part of how we grow. It's part of how we learn. But how we handle it is the important thing. And hello to Mystique Wright. It's good to see you. And hello to Renee. It's good to see you, Renee. And it's the nature of people that they're going to come into conflict also. It is just how we are. Um, it's part of our natural state of being to fight over resources. And hello to Janet in the chat room. But it's also part of our potential to be able to rise above that. And I am a great believer in constantly trying to become better, trying to rise above. Well, I've said before, normal is what we try to rise above. We try to rise above that lowest common denominator. If we look at our ancestral origins, there are lots of things our ancestors did. Hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. That we would not want to be doing now. We have risen above them. Early humans seem to have been highly cannibalistic. We have, with the occasional exception, risen above that as a society. We certainly were fighting all the time from all appearances. And we've risen a little bit above that. Hello to Fox Fur Witch in the chat room. But as individuals, we can definitely rise above it. I often talk about how wrong it is to say that ideas of good and bad are unchanging, because in fact they've changed tremendously historically. You often see in the contemporary United States, particularly Christian nationalists, say that good never changes, it's always the same. But if you look at, say, the morality of the Bible, most people today would not consider it very moral if they had to deal with that particular milieu as it was. Hello to Steve in the chat room. Things have changed. They have changed, most would say, for the better. We no longer practice slavery. Some of us practice polyamory, but we no longer, for the most part, practice polygamy. We do not kill our children at our whim, all of which are things that are perfectly in keeping with biblical morality. Our ideas of morality have risen above. If we look at ancient Egypt, a culture that I'm generally a great fan of, but if we look at some of the punishments they had, some of the ways they did things. We have risen above that also. Um, One of the things I frequently talk about is there are many great historical teachers who I consider great historical teachers, as long as you separate them from bad practices of their time. I think Confucius had wonderful things to teach, and I'm a great fan of some parts of Confucianism. Other parts, however, I consider very regressive, particularly in terms of gender relations, um, attitudes towards slavery, etc. Um, that doesn't mean that there isn't also good there, but we have to let the bad go. I actually think Jesus had a number of good things to say, but you have to separate him from his time too, because he was a pro-slavery person. He said it repeatedly, and that is in no way a good thing. And in fact, if we look at all of the philosophers of the ancient world, I don't know of any of them who wasn't pro-slavery, but that doesn't make it right. It just makes it a different time. Um, so we change our ideas of what is good and what is proper behavior. And when it comes to conflict, as a culture, we have greatly changed our ideas of when and how conflict is acceptable. When we look, I was going to say when we look at our pagan community, but really if we look at our contemporary community in the United States, conflict is wildly out of hand. And I think this has been greatly encouraged on many fronts. I often say, I spent years listening to people talk about how much they love spirited debate. We don't need any more spirited debate, thank you. We need civil discussions. We need to learn how to, once again, agree to disagree and stop fighting over nonsense. So coming back to our subject of war and peace, I'm a great believer in the idea that peace is always preferable. And that sometimes means that you must be the bigger person and not insist on carrying a particular conversation which has no immediate benefit to you, not insist on making a particular point which has no immediate benefit to you, but rather just agree to disagree sometimes. And why is this preferable? Well, speaking as a leader, speaking as someone who has headed a number of organizations and still does, you want to use your time to build the things that build yourself and your organizations, not fritter them away on nonsense. Same thing we were talking about yesterday. And for the most part, conflict is nonsense in the ways we commonly encounter it. Now, there are times when conflict is necessary. There are times when conflict is the right thing to do. And we were just talking about one of them, the former prevalence of slavery and the fact that there are still people, apparently even in the United States, who think this is just fine. That is absolutely not fine, and we must be in conflict with that, in my opinion. I would say the same about misogyny. Yes, this is a place we must have conflict. Civil rights are a place we must have conflict if conflict is going to be there. That is not a place where we can agree to disagree for the most part. And this is often discussed these days, that, we can agree to disagree on our favorite ice cream flavor, not our basic civil rights. And that's absolutely true. So when we look at war and peace, they both do have a place. And there are times when you must enter into conflict, but you must also be careful to make sure it's actually necessary, that it's actually going to benefit the situation, and that you're not just wasting your time and your energy. There are some people, it does you no good to talk to them because it's like talking to a wall. Entering into a conflict with them over regressive points of view is a waste of time because nothing you say and nothing you do is going to make any difference to them. The conflict over important civil rights and similar subjects is still important, but you want to look for the places where your effort makes a difference. Otherwise, you're simply wasting. And one of the things I can tell you as an older person who has come close to death on a number of occasions is that you only have so much time. Now, when you're younger, and I suspect that the majority of the people watching this are younger than myself, um, it doesn't necessarily seem that way. And especially if you're in your 20s, it seems like you've got all the time in the world. But the truth is, we live in this incarnation for a finite period of time, and we don't know how long it's going to be. And when it comes to our efforts and where we put them, we want to make sure we're putting them in good places. This is even more important if you're in a position of leadership, because it's not only your efforts, it's the efforts of other people in the organizations that you're involved in. You're not only committing yourself to a particular conflict. For example, I am deeply in conflict with the concept of Project 2025. I am deeply in conflict with Christian nationalism. And I make no apologies for that. I think it's a place we must be in conflict. However, how I go about that, I want to make sure is practical and offers a path to eventual success, or at least as much success as is possible. Otherwise, I'm simply throwing away the resources that I have. And I'll give you an example. One of the things I've seen on Facebook recently is the idea that Project 2025 violates the law by involving a 501c3 organization, the Heritage Foundation, in politics, and that you should therefore take some time and write to the IRS to complain. The problem is the people who are fomenting this particular meme, this particular idea, do not understand the law that they're referring to. I consider Project 2025 to be absolutely reprehensible. However, it does not violate that law. Taking time to write to the IRS about that is wasting time, wasting effort, and may leave a person feeling like effort that they expend is simply wasted, when in fact, if they put it in a more practical direction, it would not have been. Why does Project 2025 not violate that law? The law that they're referring to for 501c3s, particularly churches, but in general, is that they cannot endorse a particular candidate or party as such. Project 2025 doesn't do that. It endorses ideas, and while it makes some reference to candidates and parties, it does not do so in a manner that can be said to be endorsing them. Therefore, it doesn't violate that. Therefore, that is not a good route to opposing. Now, I've also seen people talk about boycotting some of the companies that are backing it. That, I think, is a more practical course of action, provided that you're sure that they're actually doing it, and provided you ever spent money there in the first place. Early on, I saw a list of companies that were supporting Project 2025, and virtually none of them were places I had ever spent a dollar. You can't boycott what you did not patronize in the first place. Now, there are a couple on there now that that's not true for. For example, here in Danville, Walmart is a major place for people to shop. Unfortunately, as in many places, it's also hard not to shop there. But it is a place I could boycott because I have spent money there. But so many of the other things, I look at them and say, I barely knew this company existed. Boycotting it is not going to be a useful thing for me to do because I wasn't there in the first place. I would only make myself look like a fool by suggesting that they were going to lose business on my account, when in fact it will not influence them at all, and they will surely see that. Another example, there's been a lot of talk about Starbucks having backed Project 2025. Except this is not true. And hello to Andre in the chat room. It's good to see you, Andre. What Starbucks actually did is it entered into a partnership where it is volunteering coffee to first responders at both political conventions. Nothing to do with supporting either party as such, or certainly not supporting Project 2025. Again, going out and boycotting Starbucks over that would be a waste of energy. So if you're going to enter into a conflict, particularly as a leader, make sure you know what's actually happening. Do not be brought into something that may turn out to be an embarrassment because it wasn't true, a waste of time and energy because it wasn't true, or a waste of time and energy simply because you cannot affect it. Look for what you can affect. Make your actions practical so that when you take them, they have a meaning. Last year there was a change of administration in the Karelian tradition. I've been one of the first priesthood of the Karelian tradition for 45 years now, and still am one of the first priesthood. But I retired from active service in that role last year, and there was a change of administration. And both before and after that change, I did everything in my power to point out to anyone who was part of this that my principal role through most of those 45 years was actually keeping peace between different people. And that in order for things to go forward smoothly, someone has to be playing that role. I think this is true in any major organization. It is natural. When you have a large number of people working together, they're not always going to agree on what needs to be done. And someone has to be there to keep those people at peace when they disagree. And there are all kinds of ways to do that. But it must be done, or you end up with a mess. Unfortunately, it is true that no matter what the organization, no matter what the religion, no matter what the ethnicity, no matter what other metadata about people, at a certain level, they're just people. And they can be caught up in needless emotional conflicts. And so having people, a person or people whose job includes keeping that peace, trying to step in when there are problems, that's very important. And if you want to be a leader, whether in an organization or just in life, trying to keep peace is a very important part of that. Because if you don't have peace in your organization, it can't do anything except fight among themselves. The peace is always, certainly within an organization, the preferable course of action, and outside as well, because when you're in a state of peace, you can do the next positive project. You can build, you can expand, you can grow, you can learn, because you're not expending all of your energies in conflict. And the more that you can avoid conflict, the better you and anyone working with you is going to be. That's not to say it can always be avoided, but it's best when it is. It is always best to be doing the positive, creative things that will carry you forward. And to some extent, even when it's necessary to engage in conflict, why are you doing it? So that you can get back to the point that you're doing those positive, creative things. I sometimes think that people use unnecessary conflict as an excuse never to do the positive, creative things, or an excuse for why they think they can't do it. If they're constantly in a state of incessant warfare, well, then they have a ready-made excuse for why they never did anything worthwhile. They never let us do the worthwhile things. We could never get to that point. But if you're not going to do those worthwhile things, why are you bothering? Yes, sometimes conflict is necessary. That's why this program is called War and Peace. But make sure when you have that conflict that it's helping you get back to a state of peace where you can do good things. Now, I've heard it said that peace is not a natural state for humankind. And I think that's true. But again, we rise above our natural state. We are, or at least until recently, and possibly even still, one of the most peaceful periods in human history as far as open conflict goes. You can't tell it, and it seems like people everywhere are looking for conflict when they don't seem to have enough of it. This tells you a lot about people. But it also tells you that we have moved from a more combative past to a more peaceful present, even if not universally, even if not everywhere. And we can move to a still more peaceful future where we can improve our societies, improve our communities, improve our organizations, and use all of those energies that could be wasted in unnecessary conflict in necessary building. And this should always be your goal as a leader. Now, I've pointed out that from 1990 to 2007, we had something like 17 years of constant witch wars in the Chicago area, often over absolute nonsense. And this was kind of general for the pagan community at the time. You can't necessarily avoid it. However, that doesn't mean you get caught in it either. They say it takes two people to make a fight. That's not true at all. If one person is fighting and the other one is not, sometimes that just becomes a beatdown. It depends entirely on the situation. If you're in a position where you can simply ignore someone's attempt to attack you, then that's what you should do. We're not always in that situation. But when we are, it's the better course of action, and you should never fight down if you can avoid it. One of the great witch war tactics of the pagan world is for relatively unimportant people and or unimportant organizations to attack other far more prominent people or organizations in the hope of getting them to respond, because it pulls up the less well-known person in public opinion and makes them appear to have a moral equivalency. This is a bad thing, and if you're in a position where you are that larger entity, don't do that. And if you have an ankle-biting dog chewing on your pant cuff, it's far better to let them chew than to kick them through the hedge. Because if you kick them through the hedge, one, they're going to look far more justified. They're going to look far more comparable to you, and also you're going to look cruel. You're going to look like you've abused your position. It's far better to ignore them if you can, to let them go and do whatever nonsense they're going to do, and let the truth come out, because it will, in most cases, come out. I look back at the witch wars I've seen in this community, and for the most part, over time, people have been wise enough to see who was trying to make something out of nothing and who was doing the right thing. I won't say that's always been true in every instance, but it's been true in a lot of them. And my advice is, when you can, avoid conflict. Choose peace and do the good things that peace allows you to do. Build yourself, build your organizations, build your projects. Do positive things that make positive differences in your life and other people's lives as well. If that's not your goal in being a leader, whether we're talking about a leader of an organization or just wanting to live your life in a way that leads by example, if that's not your goal, then your goal is probably rather questionable. It should be to do these good, positive things. Sometimes you must enter into conflict. If, well, one of my favorite quotes is a paraphrase of the great writer William Baldwin. And the quote, as I usually say it, it's not an exact quote, it's a paraphrase, but we can disagree and still love each other as long as what we disagree on is not my fundamental right to exist. In that case, there must be conflict. If someone does not feel you have a right to exist, well then, yes, you're in conflict with them whether you want to be or not. And it's appropriate to be in conflict with that. If someone's goal is to eliminate your legal civil rights, you're in conflict with them whether you choose to be or not, and you should actively engage that. If you just sit by and let it happen, you have contributed yourself to your loss. So I'm not saying conflict is never necessary, but I am saying before you enter into any conflict, ask yourself, is it necessary? Is it what my energies in this case are best spent on? And sometimes the answer is going to be yes. Most often it will be no. And that again is why, although I originally was going to call this particular broadcast Peace, in keeping with yesterday's Choose Your Battles, I decided War and Peace was the better title. Now, Mary says, or assign them the task of fixing the issue. Found an issue with Pagan Pride Day? Excellent. Please join the committee and take that on next year. Well, this actually is a very good point. And it's something I'm notorious for. That when someone has a really good idea, I very often would say to them, that's wonderful. Now that you've chosen that job, how are you going to do it? But truthfully, if someone comes to you with a problem, and it's a real problem, why not have them be part of what fixes it? That is a good way to handle these things. I always found it so. And, sometimes you'll find that the person who has brought up this problem has no intention of addressing it. They just wanted to create a problem. Or they thought it would be far easier than it really is to deal with. Or for whatever reason, you'll never hear from them again once you've given them the job. But other times, you'll find very effective people who really will help you with the task of keeping everything running. And although we have 2 minutes left, and it's hardly the time to introduce a new subject, delegation. Not always my strong suit, but something I recognize as vitally important and have tried to get better at, is a very important skill. You cannot do everything. One of the reasons leaders, especially I think sometimes pagan leaders, do end up doing everything, so they have people who will volunteer and then not do the job. And in the end, they figure it's better to just do it themselves and get it done. But the truth is, if you can find good people to help you, you're far better off. This too is a way of avoiding conflict and a way of involving other people in doing the good things that need to be done. The more people you can involve in doing the good things that need to be done, the happier everyone is going to be. So with that, we've come to the end of our half hour. Tomorrow, I'll be doing mini readings. So if you've been waiting for that mini reading, join me tomorrow, and we will be doing it then. And I'll be talking a little bit about Corellian publishing and things that we're doing with that. And Chris Copeland, who's usually my guest on Wednesdays, is still on vacation, hence mini readings. But people like mini readings, so we'll have a wonderful show. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me, and let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to continue to be with us and guide us as we go forward. Help us to know when it is necessary to find ourselves in conflict, and if we must, how to pursue that in the most effective ways. But whenever possible, help us to find peace, and to help others to find peace as well. Help us to build and grow and create a better world for all of those around us. And let us be the change we wish to see. As Gandhi once said, beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We know you are always with us. From respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. I will see you tomorrow.